So this video is to show how to do our project of a still life of simple forms, shading them with charcoal. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to draw 5 objects. I want them carefully drawn and arranged. And I'm looking for a mastery of highlight, form shadow, cast shadow, and lastly, we're going to use the technique of sfumato. Sfumato is an Italian word from the Renaissance, and it means smoky. And in this case, it means no strong outlines or strange glowing around the objects. Instead, when we shade, we want to have just sort of a soft edge and let our shading create the forms, not outlines or glowing areas. So, first things first, there are some tips for using charcoal. So our first tip is charcoal and pencil don't really mix well. They're almost like oil and water. And I'll show you what I mean. Here is a number 2 pencil. I'm just going to sort of color darkly with it. Then when I try to cover that with charcoal, it doesn't really take. And the reason why is graphite pencil is fundamentally slick. And so it won't grab hold of the charcoal. So the result is, can you use charcoal and pencil together? Yes. But you just can't color until the pencil is slick. You can't have that dark, slick line. Another technique is to use the right eraser. So here's an eraser I've used for charcoal, so it's obviously pretty dirty. Here's another eraser. It's called a kneaded eraser, and it's the same thing. It's just sort of a latex eraser. It's just a different recipe. This recipe is soft. So what happens is you can use this on charcoals, and you can scrub with it like an eraser. You can stamp with it, and it picks it up. And then it'll eventually get so dirty it'll stop working, and that's when you knead it. And that will clean it off and reactivate it, you might say. And the word again is kneaded, was spelled with a K, and it's just like when you knead bread. And lastly, if you have it available, you may want to spray affix your drawings. And spray fixative is basically hairspray for your drawings. You'll discover that charcoal is a messy medium, it's dusty, and spraying your drawings will really help them last longer. Now, let's go back to our requirements. What we're trying to illustrate here is a mastery of highlight, form shadow, and cast shadow. And what that means is light behaves in a very dependable, predictable way, and as a result, artists can mimic that. So when an object is close to light, it creates a highlight. As the object falls away from the light, a form shadow occurs. This shadow creates the sense of 3D form, and as a result, this shadow will take the shape of the form. What I mean is a sphere will have a circular form shadow, a cone will have a triangular form shadow, and cubes and cylinders will have sort of simple flat form shadows. And then again, opposite the highlight, the form shadow, then an object will throw a cast shadow. And cast shadows are darkest at the foot and become lighter and softer as they move away. And in the spirit of sfumato, cast shadow shouldn't have any strong outline. A cast shadow is not an object that has this outline making you think you could grab it. It's this sort of magical lack of light. So that's the elements of shading. So I'm going to do a demo quickly. So first and foremost, carefully drawn objects. It doesn't matter how well you shade these objects. If they're messy or poorly drawn, you won't get a great result. So I've got 1, 2, 3, Let's try 4, and then 5. So I'm using my pencil, and I'm using it with a light touch. As a result, the charcoal will cover it. If I did a really hard, slick line, my charcoal would never cover the pencil marks. All right, I'm going to draw a little horizon line or tabletop line. So I'm going to start with my form shadow. I'm going to start on a sphere. So I want my shadow to fade to white. What you'll discover is charcoal can kind of grab into the paper. And so I'm going to start in my dark area and smudge this with my finger and smudge it towards the white. See that circular shape? A sphere is round, so its form shadow will be round. So I'm moving that. I don't want to have any harsh edges, and especially I don't want any harsh edges in my shadows. So I've got that. Now, I want a little more gray. What I'll do is I'll build it up in the dark. That way, if the charcoal sort of grabs hold of the paper and won't budge, it won't be noticeable in this deep dark. Whereas that mark could be just so distracting in my light grays and in my white highlights. And see now, with a light touch, I can feather in that highlight. I've got my highlight, my form shadow, and then I'll do a cast shadow. I like to throw my cast shadows just off to the side. So I've placed it in. I've avoided putting a harsh outline. I'm going to feather that, smudge it out, and then again, I can darken it right at the foot. That's where the object's going to block the light almost completely. And then quickly, the ambient light will sort of start feathering in. So let's move to a cone. A cone is a triangular shape, so its form shadow is going to be a similar triangle. It's going to go all the way up to the top, all the way down to the base, and widen at the base, just like the cone widens at the base. So I've started my gray, and you can see how charcoal sort of grabs the paper, which can be frustrating. So fortunately, that's in an area that I think will eventually be dark, so I can keep darkening that. I'm getting some dust on my paper, some charcoal, so that I have something to work with. A sculptor works with clay, and a charcoal artist works with the dust of the charcoal. There we go. And then I don't like my highlights right on the edge of my object, so even though my light's coming from the left, I'm not going to have my highlight right on the left. So I'm trying to just get a little charcoal dust there. And then a triangular cone will cast a triangular cast shadow. Now, I could continue with these objects, but I kind of want to demo sort of how you would go about finishing it. So imagine I finished shading those. Let's just now focus on the two objects that I've actually gotten shaded. So now what I want to do is I want to darken both the sky and the table, because I only have these few tools of white, gray, and black to create my illusion. And white is really powerful. That's my highlight. That's popping forward. And I've got this powerful tool, and I'm overusing it. There's too much white. And now, instead, I only want the highlights of the page to remain white. So I'm going to put quite a bit of dust back here. I want to darken my background. Even though I'm coloring with the side of the charcoal, I'm still pressing lightly enough so that it doesn't grab hold. So I've got a good amount of charcoal dust, and I'm going to start softening that. I don't want some distracting pattern in the background. Even if that pattern is somehow attractive or pleasing, it's still noise that we don't want for our picture. So I'm softening that. Trying to control that. And I'm now going to do something that speaks to my last point. Sfumato, no strong outlines or glow around the object. It's tempting to leave this glow to let your project really have this clarity. But in reality, there aren't these kind of outlines or glow in objects. So don't be afraid to kind of blur them together. And if it blurs too much, you can always go back and draw it out. But what we want to create is a world where our shading, our highlights, our form shadows, our cast shadows create the drawing, and not some sort of artificial outline or artificial supernatural glowing. So I did draw a line, but then I blur it into the background. And that starts creating. Now with all that charcoal dust here, I can kind of pull some of it down into the table. I like making my skies dark, and more specifically making the table gray, because I like the table gray so that I can still have a cast shadow. If the table was black, my black cast shadow wouldn't show. Now again, on this sfumato idea, I'm just going to blur right over my shadow. I don't want my shadow to feel like this separate object, like some sort of plate on the sitting on the table, some black plate or some hole that an object could fall through. So I want it to sort of be on the table. And so I'm smudging this together. I feel like I lost my edge a little too much, so I can reestablish it. So it's this back and forth. Charcoals, I almost call them lost and found projects, because you never are able to just say, I'm done with this shape, and then never have to revisit it. You'll draw something, it'll be beautiful, you'll shade it, it'll get too out of focus, you'll fix it, you'll work on something else, then your hand will have smudged it. So it's a forgiving medium, but then it's also a very demanding medium that way. And so that is how you create a charcoal drawing. And again, you want to have 5 objects, carefully draw and arrange them. You want to be a master of highlight, form shadow, cast shadow. And sfumato is where you don't have a strong outline defining your forms. Instead, it's your highlight and your shadows that really define the form. It's not that you can't have an edge. It's not that you can't see something that in a way could be interpreted as a line or an edge, but that it is part of the bigger picture. It's part of your shadow. And so you want to do that on a sheet of paper that is 12 inches by 18 inches. You want to use charcoal, kneaded eraser. You can always use a hard eraser if you like. And that is how you create a charcoal drawing with 5 forms.